The dust cloud was visible from 3 miles away, and Caleb Henderson knew it meant trouble. What he found, tied to that ancient cottonwood tree, would change everything he thought he knew about courage, honor, and the true meaning of wealth. A towering Lakota woman, left for dead by raiders, held secrets that would shake the very foundation of the Montana Territory. But first, he had to cut her down before the vultures circling overhead made their final descent. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The summer of 1882 had been merciless to the Montana Territory. Caleb Henderson pulled his worn hat lower over his eyes as he guided his mare, Dusty, through the scorching heat that shimmered off the prairie like liquid glass. The cattle he'd been tracking had wandered farther than usual, probably searching for the same thing he was, water that hadn't dried up in the relentless drought. Caleb had been working the Bartee Ranch for nearly 8 years, ever since he'd drifted up from Texas with nothing but his horse, his rifle, and a determination to start fresh. At 32, he'd earned a reputation as one of the most reliable hands in the territory. Ranch owner Theodore Blackwood trusted him to handle the difficult jobs, the ones that required both skill and judgment. The dust cloud appeared on the horizon just after noon, rising in lazy spirals against the cloudless sky. Caleb reined in Dusty and reached for his spyglass, scanning the terrain ahead. Something was wrong. The dust wasn't moving like it should if it was caused by cattle or wild horses. It hung in the air too long, too dense, like smoke from a dying fire. As he drew closer, the acrid smell hit him first, the unmistakable stench of death and burnt wood. Then he saw the remains of what had once been a small camp. 3 teepees had been reduced to charred poles and scattered hides. Personal belongings lay strewn across the ground, trampled and destroyed. The bodies of 2 Lakota men lay motionless near the center of the camp, their weapons beside them in the dirt. Caleb dismounted slowly, his hand instinctively moving to the Colt .45 on his hip. His eyes swept the scene, taking in the details that told the story of what had happened here. The hoof prints were fresh, maybe 6 hours old. 12, possibly 15 riders had attacked at dawn, coming from the east. The defenders had fought bravely, but were outnumbered. It was then that he heard it, a sound so faint he almost missed it over the buzzing of flies and the whisper of wind through the grass. A low moan, barely human, coming from the direction of the old cottonwood tree that stood like a sentinel 50 yards from the destroyed camp. What Caleb saw when he approached the tree made his blood run cold. A woman hung suspended from the lowest branch, her wrists bound with rawhide rope that had been thrown over the limb. Her feet barely touched the ground, and she'd clearly been hanging there for hours. But it wasn't just any woman. She was enormous, easily 6 feet and 8 inches tall, with the powerful build of a warrior. Her long black hair hung in front of her face, and her buckskin dress was torn and stained with blood. For a moment, Caleb thought she was dead. Then her head moved slightly, and that soft moan escaped her lips again. She was alive, but barely. He rushed forward, pulling out his knife to cut the ropes. The woman's weight nearly knocked him over as she collapsed, and he struggled to ease her to the ground. Up close, he could see the extent of her injuries. Her wrists were raw and bleeding from the ropes. There was a deep gash across her forehead, and bruises covered her arms and face. But what struck him most were her eyes. Even in her weakened state, they burned with an intelligence and defiance that made him take a step back. She tried to speak, but only a hoarse whisper emerged. Caleb quickly retrieved his water canteen and helped her take small sips. As the water touched her lips, some strength seemed to return to her features. "Who did this?" he asked gently, her eyes focused on him with difficulty. When she spoke, her English was perfect, though heavily accented. "McKinnon's men. They came at sunrise." Caleb's jaw tightened. He knew the name well. Sean McKinnon was a cattle baron who'd been expanding his holdings throughout the territory, often through methods that skirted the edge of the law. There had been rumors of his men harassing Native American settlements, claiming they were protecting grazing land. How many were killed? Caleb asked. My brother and his friend. Her voice grew stronger as she drank more water. They tried to protect me, but there were too many. What's your name? Sarah Windcatcher. She struggled to sit up straighter. Daughter of Chief Joseph Windcatcher of the Northern Lakota. Caleb felt his heart skip. Even he, a simple ranch hand, knew that name. Joseph Windcatcher was one of the most respected chiefs in the territory, a man who had worked tirelessly to maintain peace between his people and the growing number of white settlers. He was also rumored to be one of the wealthiest Native Americans in the region, though the source of his wealth was a mystery that had spawned countless stories and legends. We need to get you to a doctor, Caleb said, helping her to her feet. She towered over him even more than he'd expected, and despite her injuries, she moved with the grace of someone accustomed to her unusual height. No doctor, she said firmly. My father has medicine men who can tend to my wounds. But first we must bury my brother. Caleb looked back toward the camp. I don't have tools to dig graves. Sarah pointed toward a rocky outcropping about 100 yards away. There is a sacred cave there. It is where our people have laid their dead for generations. We need only carry them there. For the next 2 hours, as the sun beat down mercilessly, Caleb helped Sarah prepare her brother and his companion for burial. Her name was Peter Windcatcher, and he was only 19 years old. His friend, Thomas Brightfeather, was even younger. As they worked, Sarah told him about their lives, how they had been traveling to meet with other tribal leaders about the increasing encroachment on their lands. Peter wanted to be a teacher, she said, as they wrapped his body in what remained of undamaged blankets. He believed education was the path forward for our people. He could speak 4 languages and read better than most white men. Caleb found himself moved by her words and the gentle way she tended to her brother's body. Despite her imposing size and obvious strength, there was a tenderness in her actions that spoke to a deep capacity for love and compassion. As they carried the bodies to the cave, Sarah began to sing in her native language. Her voice was rich and powerful, echoing off the canyon walls in a haunting melody that seemed to honor not just the dead, but all of life itself. Caleb found himself thinking about his own family, lost to typhoid fever when he was just 16, and how he'd never had the chance to say goodbye properly. After the burial ceremony was complete, Sarah turned to him. You could have ridden away when you saw this was native trouble. Why did you help? Caleb removed his hat and wiped his brow. Same reason anyone should help. Because it was right. She studied his face for a long moment. Most white men in this territory would not see it that way. Then most white men in this territory are fools. A ghost of a smile crossed Sarah's lips. My father will want to thank you for what you've done. Our village is a day's ride north. Will you come? Caleb hesitated. He was expected back at the ranch by evening, and Theodore Blackwood didn't tolerate tardiness from his hands. But something about Sarah Windcatcher intrigued him. Maybe it was her obvious intelligence, or the way she carried herself despite her ordeal, or simply the mystery surrounding her family's legendary wealth. I'll ride with you, he decided. But I can only stay a short while. I have obligations. They gathered what few salvageable belongings remained from the camp and loaded them onto Caleb's pack horse. Sarah had her own mount, a magnificent black stallion that had somehow escaped the raiders' attention by wandering off during the attack. As she swung into the saddle, Caleb was again struck by her remarkable presence. Even injured and exhausted, she commanded attention. The ride north took them through some of the most beautiful country Caleb had ever seen. Rolling hills covered in buffalo grass stretched to the horizon, broken by stands of cottonwood and aspen that followed the winding paths of streams and rivers. Sarah proved to be an excellent traveling companion, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of her people's history in the region. This land has been home to the Lakota for more generations than the white man can count. And, she said as they paused to rest the horses near a crystal-clear spring, my great-grandfather's bones are buried in these hills, and his great-grandfather's before him. What will happen now? Caleb asked. With McKinnon's men becoming more aggressive, Sarah's expression hardened. That remains to be seen. My father is not a man who forgives easily, but he is also not one to start wars unnecessarily. McKinnon may have made a mistake he will come to regret. As the sun began to sink toward the western horizon, they crested a hill, and Caleb got his first glimpse of Chief Joseph Windcatcher's village. What he saw took his breath away. This was no collection of simple typists struggling to survive on the edges of civilization. Spread out in the valley below was a thriving community of nearly 200 people, with substantial wooden buildings alongside traditional dwellings. Gardens and corrals suggested a level of prosperity that challenged everything Caleb thought he knew about Native American life in the territory. "Welcome to Windcatcher Valley," Sarah said, and there was unmistakable pride in her voice. As they descended into the village, people began to emerge from their homes. When they recognized Sarah, word spread quickly through the community. By the time they reached the center of the village, a crowd had gathered. Caleb noticed that many of the people were dressed in clothing that mixed traditional Native American elements with modern fabrics and styles. Children played with toys that looked store-bought rather than handmade. At the heart of the village stood the largest building Caleb had ever seen outside of a major city. It was 2 stories tall, built of stone and timber, with glass windows that sparkled in the fading sunlight. As they approached, the massive wooden door opened, and a man stepped out who could only be Chief Joseph Windcatcher. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. He was not quite as tall as his daughter, but his presence was even more commanding. Despite being in his 60s, he moved with the confident stride of a much younger man. His long grey hair was braided with what looked like silver ornaments, and his clothes were a fascinating blend of Native American beadwork and fine Eastern tailoring. But it was his eyes that captured Caleb's attention, sharp, intelligent, and filled with a mixture of grief and burning anger. "My daughter," he said, and his voice carried clearly across the gathering crowd. Sarah dismounted and went to him, and for a moment the powerful chief simply held her, his relief evident to everyone present. When they separated, Joseph Windcatcher's gaze fell on Caleb. "And you are the man who saved her life." Chief Joseph Windcatcher's handshake was firm, his calloused palm speaking of a man who had worked with his hands despite his obvious wealth. "I'm Joseph Windcatcher. My daughter tells me you risked your life to save hers." "Any decent man would have done the same," Caleb replied, though he couldn't help but notice the ornate silver bracelet on the chief's wrist, embedded with what looked like genuine turquoise stones. "You would be surprised how few decent men we encounter these days." Joseph's eyes moved to the packed belongings on Caleb's horse, and his expression grew somber. "Peter?" Sarah stepped closer to her father. "He fought bravely, father, as did Thomas. They are now with our ancestors in the sacred cave." The chief closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them again, Caleb saw a flash of something that made him take an involuntary step back. It wasn't grief anymore. It was cold, calculating fury. "Come," Joseph said, gesturing toward the impressive building. "We have much to discuss." The interior of the chief's home was unlike anything Caleb had ever seen. The main room soared 2 stories high, with a massive stone fireplace dominating one wall. But what caught his attention were the furnishings, hand-carved furniture that looked like it belonged in a wealthy businessman's parlor, oil paintings in gilded frames, and what appeared to be a collection of books that rivaled any library in Denver or Chicago. "You seem surprised by our accommodations, Mr. Henderson," Joseph observed, settling into a leather chair that probably cost more than Caleb made in 6 months. "I admit, it's not what I expected. Most white settlers assume we live in poverty and ignorance." Joseph poured amber liquid from a crystal decanter into 3 glasses. "They prefer to believe that narrative. It makes taking our land easier to justify. Sarah accepted a glass and settled into a chair across from them. Even seated, her impressive height was apparent, and Caleb noticed how naturally she commanded space in the richly appointed room. "My father has built something remarkable here," she said. "But it has also made us a target." Joseph handed Caleb a glass of what turned out to be the finest whiskey he'd ever tasted. 20 years ago, I made a decision that changed everything for our people. While other chiefs were fighting losing battles against the cavalry, I chose a different path." He walked to a large map mounted on the wall, marking territories throughout the Montana region. Red pins marked various locations, far more than Caleb would have expected for a single tribal area. "I realized that the white man's world was coming whether we resisted or not. So instead of fighting it, I decided to master it." Joseph pointed to several of the red pins. "These mark our business interest: cattle ranches, silver mines, timber operations, and trading posts." Caleb nearly choked on his whiskey. "You own silver mines?" "3 of them, along with the largest cattle operation in the Northern Territory." Joseph's smile was sharp. "We employ over 400 people, both native and white. Our beef feeds half of Denver, and our silver has found its way into banks as far east as New York. How is that possible?" Sarah leaned forward. "My father spent 5 years learning everything he could about business, law, and finance. He traveled to Chicago, New York, even San Francisco. He learned to speak the white man's language, not just with his tongue, but with his mind." Joseph nodded. "I realized that paper was more powerful than bullets. Legal documents, contracts, mineral rights, these became our weapons. While other tribes were losing their land through warfare, we were buying it back through business. But that's made you enemies," Caleb said, beginning to understand the larger picture. "Indeed, men like Sean McKinnon see our success as a threat. He has been trying to acquire our grazing lands for 2 years, making increasingly aggressive offers." Joseph's voice hardened. "When we refused to sell, he apparently decided to try intimidation." A young Native American man entered the room, dressed in clothes that marked him as educated and sophisticated. "Father, the council is ready to meet." "Thank you, William." Joseph turned to Caleb. "My eldest son. He graduated from Harvard University last year and handles many of our legal affairs." William Windcatcher shook Caleb's hand with the confident grip of someone accustomed to negotiating with powerful men. "Mr. Henderson, my sister tells me you showed remarkable courage today. Our family is in your debt. I just did what anyone should have done." "Perhaps," William said, "but in our experience, very few people actually do what they should." Joseph stood and walked to a large safe in the corner of the room. As he worked the combination, Caleb caught glimpses of stacks of papers and what looked like leather pouches, heavy with coins. "Our success has not come without cost," the chief continued. "We've had to learn to defend ourselves in ways our ancestors never imagined. We employ lawyers, investigators, even guards when necessary." He withdrew a leather folder and spread its contents on a large table. Caleb found himself looking at detailed maps, legal documents, and what appeared to be surveillance reports. "For months, we've been gathering evidence of McKinnon's illegal activities. Cattle theft, intimidation of homesteaders, bribery of territorial officials." Joseph's finger traced routes marked on the maps. "Today's attack was the final piece we needed." Sarah joined them at the table. "McKinnon made a critical error. He assumed we were just another struggling tribe that could be bullied into submission. He doesn't realize that we have resources he can't even imagine." William pulled out a telegram from the stack of papers. "This arrived 3 hours ago. Our attorney in Denver has already filed charges against McKinnon with the territorial marshal. The federal government takes attacks on Native American settlements very seriously, especially when there's evidence of premeditation." Caleb studied the document spread before him. "This is incredible. You have enough evidence here to put McKinnon away for years." "That's only the beginning," Joseph said. "Our investigators have uncovered something else. McKinnon's cattle empire is built on borrowed money, lots of it. He's been using land he doesn't actually own as collateral for loans from eastern banks." Sarah smiled, and there was something predatory in the expression. When those banks discover that their collateral is worthless, McKinnon's empire will collapse overnight. A woman entered carrying a tray of food, and Caleb realized he hadn't eaten since early morning. The meal was a fascinating blend of traditional Native American dishes and what he recognized as sophisticated cuisine from fancy restaurants. The conversation continued as they ate, and Caleb found himself drawn deeper into the Windcatcher family's complex world. "There's something else," William said as they finished eating. "Our sources tell us that McKinnon is planning something bigger. The attack on Sarah and Peter wasn't random violence. It was meant to send a message." Joseph's expression grew grave. "He's trying to force us into a war. If he can provoke us into retaliating with violence, he can claim we're a threat to white settlers and call in federal troops." "But you're not going to take the bait," Caleb said. "Oh, we're going to retaliate," Sarah said quietly. "Just not the way he expects." William opened another folder, revealing financial documents that made Caleb's eyes widen. McKinnon owes money to 17 different creditors. His total debt exceeds $800,000. "We've been quietly purchasing those debts," Joseph explained. "As of this afternoon, the Windcatcher Family Business Consortium owns 60% of Sean McKinnon's obligations." The implications hit Caleb like a thunderbolt. "You're going to call in his loans." "Tomorrow morning," Sarah confirmed. "When McKinnon wakes up, he'll discover that he has exactly 30 days to repay over $500,000 or forfeit everything he owns." Joseph walked to a window overlooking the village. In the gathering darkness, Caleb could see lights in dozens of buildings, hear the sounds of a thriving community settling in for the evening. "My great-grandfather fought the cavalry with arrows and war paint," the chief said. "I fight with lawyers and bank drafts. The result is the same. We protect our people and our land. What happens to me now?" Caleb asked. "McKinnon's men saw me at the camp. They'll know I was involved." William and Sarah exchanged glances. "We've been discussing that," William said. "You're in considerable danger. McKinnon won't hesitate to eliminate witnesses." "There's something else," Sarah added. "Before he died, Peter managed to tell me something important. McKinnon's men weren't just trying to intimidate us. They were looking for something specific." She walked to a bookshelf and removed what looked like an ordinary volume of poetry. But when she opened it, Caleb saw that the pages had been cut out to create a hiding space containing a small leather pouch. "This," she said, opening the pouch to reveal a handful of stones that caught the lamplight like captured stars. "Diamonds." Caleb breathed. Joseph nodded. "Not just any diamonds. These came from a deposit we discovered on our land 3 months ago. Conservative estimates suggest it could be worth millions of dollars. McKinnon knows about it," William added. "Somehow, he learned about our discovery. That's why he's been so desperate to acquire our land." Sarah carefully returned the diamonds to their hiding place. "Peter was carrying samples to show potential investors in Chicago. McKinnon's men were torturing him, trying to get him to reveal the location of the main deposit. Did he tell them?" "Peter died before he could say anything," Sarah said with quiet pride. "But McKinnon knows the diamonds are somewhere on our territory. He won't give up easily." The room fell silent as the full magnitude of the situation became clear. This wasn't just about cattle grazing rights or territorial disputes. The Windcatcher family was sitting on a fortune that could reshape the entire region. "And Sean McKinnon was willing to kill for it." "Mr. Henderson," Joseph said finally, "you saved my daughter's life today, and in doing so, you've become part of something much larger than any of us anticipated. I want to offer you a choice." He walked back to the safe and withdrew a heavy leather pouch. When he set it on the table, the contents clinked with the unmistakable sound of gold coins. "This contains $500, more money than most ranch hands see in 2 years. Take it right away tonight and never look back. We'll tell McKinnon's men that the witness they're looking for has left the territory." Caleb stared at the pouch. $500 would let him buy his own ranch, start the life he'd always dreamed of, or Joseph continued. You can stay and help us finish what McKinnon started. The choice is yours, but you should know that if you stay, there's no guarantee you'll survive what's coming. Sarah leaned forward. My father is being generous, but he's also being honest. McKinnon has at least 20 men working for him, and they're all experienced killers. We have resources and intelligence, but we'll need someone who understands the white man's world from the inside. Someone McKinnon won't suspect, William added. Someone who can move freely around the territory and gather information. Caleb looked around the room at these remarkable people who had built something extraordinary in the wilderness. He thought about Peter Windcatcher, tortured and killed for refusing to betray his family's secrets. He thought about Sarah, left to die simply because her father had dared to succeed in a world that wanted him to fail. Then he thought about his own life, 8 years of working other people's cattle, sleeping in bunkhouses, drifting from one temporary job to another. He'd never had a real purpose, never been part of something that mattered. Keep your money, he said quietly. But I want something else. Joseph raised an eyebrow. What? When this is over, I want a job. A real job, working for people who understand the value of loyalty. Sarah smiled, and for the first time since he'd cut her down from that tree, it reached her eyes. I think that can be arranged. Dawn came early to Windcatcher Valley, but Caleb was already awake, standing on the balcony outside the guest room Joseph had provided. The view from the second floor revealed details he'd missed in the darkness. Extensive gardens, workshops where craftsmen were already at work, and a school building where children's laughter echoed across the morning air. Sarah appeared beside him, moving silently despite her impressive size. She changed from her torn buckskin dress into riding clothes that combined practical functionality with unmistakable quality. Sleep well? She asked, though her eyes suggested she hadn't rested much herself. Well enough. This is quite a place your father built. We all built it, she corrected. Every person in this valley contributed something. The blacksmith there used to shoe cavalry horses at Fort Benton. The woman teaching school was educated at Radcliffe College. Even our stable boys can read and write in 3 languages. Caleb studied her profile as she gazed out over the community. What about you? What's your role in all this? Sarah's smile held secrets. I'm what you might call the family's special projects coordinator. When diplomacy and legal maneuvers aren't enough, when someone needs to understand that crossing the Windcatcher family has consequences, that's when they send me. Before Caleb could ask what she meant, William appeared in the doorway. Father wants to see both of you. We've received word from town. They found Joseph in what was obviously a command center, surrounded by maps, telegrams, and coded messages. 3 men Caleb hadn't seen before sat around a large table, their appearance marking them as anything but typical ranch hands. Gentlemen, this is Caleb Henderson, Joseph announced. Caleb, meet Marcus Thompson, our head of security, Frank Morrison, who handles our financial intelligence, and Roberto Valdez, our communications specialist. Each man sized up Caleb with the practiced eye of professionals who'd learned not to trust easily. Marcus was a compact man with scars that told stories of violent encounters. Frank had the soft hands and sharp eyes of someone who fought battles with numbers instead of bullets. Roberto's fingers bore the ink stains of someone who spent long hours with telegraph keys and coded messages. What's the situation? Sarah asked, settling into a chair that creaked under her substantial frame. Marcus spread out a detailed map of the territory. McKinnon received our financial ultimatum 2 hours ago. His response was predictable. He's called in every favor he has and hired additional gunmen from as far away as Tombstone. How many? Caleb asked. At least 30, possibly more. Professional killers, not just cowboys looking for extra pay. Marcus's expression was grim. He's also sent telegrams to territorial officials claiming that hostile Indians are threatening white settlements. Frank opened a ledger filled with columns of figures. The financial pressure is working exactly as planned. 3 of McKinnon's creditors have already filed foreclosure notices. His bank in Denver is demanding immediate payment of his operating loan, but he's not going quietly, Roberto added. Our sources in town report that he's spreading word about an Indian uprising, trying to get federal troops sent in. Joseph stood and walked to a large safe, withdrawing several official-looking documents. Which brings us to our next move. Caleb, you mentioned you worked for Theodore Blackwood at the Barty Ranch. For 8 years. Why? Because Theodore Blackwood is about to become a very wealthy man, and we're going to make sure McKinnon knows exactly why he should be afraid. Sarah leaned forward with interest. Father, what are you planning? Joseph spread the documents on the table. 6 months ago, we quietly approached every major landowner in the territory with a business proposition. We offered to purchase mineral rights to their property at prices far above market value. Caleb recognized the Barty Ranch letterhead on one of the contracts. Theodore signed. He did, along with 14 other ranch owners. They thought they were selling us worthless underground rights for easy money. Joseph's smile was predatory. What they actually sold us was the legal authority to conduct geological surveys across nearly half the territory. Frank pulled out a leather portfolio filled with official survey reports. Our geologists have been working secretly for months. The diamond deposit on our original land isn't unique. It's part of a formation that extends across multiple properties, including McKinnon's, William added. Entering the room with fresh telegrams in his hand, our surveyors finished their work on his land 3 days ago. Roberto opened a coded message book. The preliminary estimates are staggering. If the deposits prove consistent across the entire geological formation, we're looking at potentially the largest diamond find in North American history. Caleb felt his head spinning. You're saying the diamonds aren't just on your land? Correct, Sarah said. They're under at least 12 different properties. Properties where we now own the mineral rights, including, Joseph added with satisfaction, the land McKinnon borrowed against for his loans, land that he'll lose when his creditors foreclose. Marcus pointed to positions marked on his map. McKinnon's men are already taking positions around our valley. They're planning to attack tomorrow night, when the moon is dark. But they don't know we have advance warning. More importantly, William said, opening his portfolio of legal documents, they don't know that as of this morning, we own controlling interest in the Territorial Bank of Montana. Frank's grin was absolutely feral. We've been quietly purchasing bank stock for 2 years. Today, we acquired the final shares needed for majority control. The implications crashed over Caleb like an avalanche. You own the bank that holds McKinnon's loans, among others, Joseph confirmed, which means we control the financial destiny of every major cattle operation in the territory, including, as of 3 hours ago, the mortgage on McKinnon's main ranch. Sarah stood and walked to a window overlooking the valley. McKinnon thinks he's forcing us into a war. What he doesn't realize is that we've already won, and he's about to discover exactly how completely he's been outmaneuvered. Roberto handed Joseph a fresh telegram. This just arrived from our attorney in Denver. The federal marshal has issued warrants for McKinnon and 8 of his men in connection with the attack on Peter and Thomas. Better yet, William added, we have witnesses placing McKinnon's men at 3 other illegal activities in the past month. Cattle theft, claim jumping, and the suspicious death of a homesteader who refused to sell his property. Marcus stood and began marking positions on his tactical map. The beauty of our position is that we don't have to fight McKinnon's gunmen. All we need to do is survive until federal law enforcement arrives tomorrow afternoon. Survive 30 professional killers for 18 hours, Caleb said grimly. That won't be easy. Sarah's laugh was rich and confident. Mr. Henderson, you still don't understand what my father has built here. Marcus, show him the real map. Marcus replaced the territorial map with a detailed layout of Windcatcher Valley. What Caleb saw made him reassess everything he thought he knew about their situation. These aren't just homes and workshops, Marcus explained. Every building is positioned to provide interlocking fields of fire. The school doubles as an armory. The blacksmith shop has been reinforced to serve as a fortress if necessary. Frank pulled out another set of documents. More importantly, we're not facing this alone. Remember those other ranch owners who sold us their mineral rights? We sent riders to each of them last night with a very interesting proposition. What kind of proposition? Joseph smiled. We offered to share our geological survey results with them. Suddenly, men who thought they'd sold worthless underground rights for a few $100s realized they'd given away potential fortunes worth millions. They're angry, William confirmed. Very angry, and they know exactly who to blame. Sean McKinnon, whose aggressive expansion forced them to make desperate deals in the first place. Roberto opened his communication logs. As of dawn this morning, we have confirmed support from 9 different ranch operations. That's over 60 armed men who will be arriving throughout the day. Sarah turned from the window. But the most important support is coming from an unexpected source. Marcus, tell him about Fort Benton. Marcus's grin revealed a gap between his front teeth. It turns out that Colonel Harrison at Fort Benton has been looking for an excuse to deal with McKinnon for months. Some of McKinnon's men have been selling army supplies on the black market. When the colonel learned about yesterday's attack and the federal warrants, he dispatched a full company of cavalry, Frank added. They'll arrive tomorrow morning, just ahead of the federal marshal. Caleb sank into his chair, overwhelmed by the complexity of what the Windcatcher family had orchestrated. This is incredible. You've turned McKinnon's own aggression against him. We've done more than that, Joseph said quietly. We've demonstrated something that no one in this territory expected, that Native Americans could master the white man's systems better than the white men themselves. A young woman entered the room carrying a breakfast tray, but her appearance made Caleb do a double-take. She was clearly Lakota, but she wore the kind of sophisticated dress he'd only seen on wealthy women in Denver, complete with jewelry that sparkled with what looked like genuine gemstones. Father, the Ladies' Council has prepared accommodations for the families arriving from the other ranches, she said in perfect English that carried the refined accent of an expensive education. Thank you, Rebecca. Caleb, this is my youngest daughter. She graduated from finishing school in Boston last year and handles our hospitality operations. Rebecca Windcatcher shook Caleb's hand with the poise of someone accustomed to meeting dignitaries. Mr. Henderson, we're honored to have you as our guest. I understand you've decided to join our family's business interests. I'm still trying to understand exactly what those business interests involve. Rebecca's laugh reminded him of silver bells. Oh, they're quite extensive. We own cattle ranches, silver mines, timber operations, 3 banks, 2 hotels in Denver, a shipping company that operates on the Missouri River, and as of last week, a majority stake in the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad's northern expansion project. Caleb's jaw dropped. The railroad. William nodded. We recognized early that transportation would be the key to developing this region's resources. When the railroad company needed capital for expansion, we provided it in exchange for ownership shares and guaranteed shipping rates for our mining operations, which means, Sarah added with evident satisfaction, that when our diamond mines begin full operation, we'll transport our products on our own railroad lines to banks that we control, using security provided by ranch hands who work for us. Joseph walked to yet another safe and withdrew a thick document bound in leather. Caleb, what you've witnessed here represents 20 years of planning and careful investment. We've built not just a business empire, but a model for how native peoples can thrive in the changing world. He opened the document to reveal architectural drawings and development plans. This valley is just the beginning. We're planning to establish similar communities throughout the territory, each one serving as a center of education, commerce, and cultural preservation. Marcus pointed to specific locations marked on the plans. We have the resources now to provide good jobs, quality education, and economic independence for thousands of native families. But only if we can protect what we've built, Roberto added, consulting his latest messages. McKinnon represents everything that threatens this vision. Men who believe that might make right, who think they can take whatever they want through violence and intimidation. Frank closed his ledger with a decisive snap. Which is why what happens in the next 24 hours is so important. We're not just defending our property. We're defending the idea that intelligence and planning can triumph over brute force. Sarah stood and checked the weapons cabinet that Caleb was just noticing for the first time. It contained an arsenal that would make a military unit envious. Modern rifles, ammunition, and what looked like experimental firearms he didn't recognize. McKinnon made one critical miscalculation, she said, expertly checking the action on a rifle that gleamed with careful maintenance. He assumed we would react like the old stereotype, that we'd paint our faces, grab our tomahawks, and charge his guns screaming war cries. Instead, William concluded, we're going to destroy him with the same weapons he thought only white men could master. Law, finance, and superior strategy. Joseph stood and walked to the window, gazing out at his thriving community. McKinnon's men are coming, expecting to find a primitive village they can terrorize into submission. What they'll discover instead is that they've walked into a trap designed by people who understand warfare far better than they ever imagined. As if summoned by his words, a rider appeared on the horizon, galloping hard toward the valley. Marcus grabbed his spyglass and studied the approaching figure. It's one of our scouts, he announced. And he's riding like he's got urgent news. The rider thundered into the village center and leapt from his exhausted horse. Even from the second-floor window, Caleb could see the man was agitated as he spoke rapidly to the people who gathered around him. Rebecca appeared in the doorway. Father, you need to hear this immediately. McKinnon's plans have changed. The scout's name was Danny Whitehorse, and his news shattered their carefully laid plans like a hammer through glass. He stood in the center of Joseph's command room, dust still coating his clothes, his chest heaving from the hard ride. McKinnon's not waiting for nightfall, Danny gasped. He's moving now, and he's got more men than we thought. At least 50 riders, maybe 60. They're split into 3 groups, coming from different directions. Marcus immediately moved to his tactical map, his face grim. When? 2 hours, maybe less. The main force is approaching from the southeast, but smaller groups are circling to cut off our escape routes. Sarah moved to the weapons cabinet with fluid efficiency. He knows about the cavalry coming from Fort Benton. Someone leaked our communications. Frank's face had gone pale. If he attacks before the federal support arrives, he can claim we fired first. Make it look like we're the aggressors. Joseph remained calm, but Caleb could see the steel in his eyes. Danny, what about their equipment? Repeating rifles, dynamite, and something else. They've got a small cannon mounted on a wagon. Looks like a 3-pounder, probably from the Civil War. William cursed under his breath. A cannon changes everything. Our defensive positions won't hold against artillery. Rebecca burst into the room, her refined composure replaced by urgency. Father, the families from the other ranches are arriving, but they're coming in scattered groups. Some won't be here for another hour. Roberto looked up from his telegraph equipment. I can't reach the cavalry unit. Something's wrong with the lines between here and Fort Benton. Cut, Marcus said flatly. McKinnon's been planning this longer than we realized. Caleb felt the weight of the situation settling on his shoulders. These remarkable people who had built something extraordinary were about to see it destroyed by a man who couldn't stand their success. What are our options? He asked. Joseph walked to a detailed scale model of the valley that occupied an entire table. Caleb hadn't noticed it before, but now he could see it was far more than a simple replica. It was a tactical planning tool with movable pieces representing buildings, natural features, and defensive positions. We have 3 choices, Joseph said. Moving pieces on the model. We can try to hold the valley and hope help arrives in time. We can evacuate our people and rebuild elsewhere. Or, he paused, studying the model with the intensity of a chess master considering a complex gambit. Or we turn the tables completely. Danny, how spread out are McKinnon's forces? The main group is tight, maybe a quarter-mile spread. But the flanking groups are at least 2 miles apart, moving to block the north and south passages. Sarah's eyes lit up with understanding. You want to hit them while they're separated? More than that, Joseph replied. I want to make McKinnon face the consequences of every decision he's made in the past year. Marcus leaned over the model. Explain. Joseph moved pieces representing their own forces. McKinnon's divided his strength because he's overconfident. He thinks he's attacking a helpless village. But what if instead of defending here, we take the fight to him? William opened his portfolio of legal documents. The diamond surveys every property McKinnon's men cross to reach us is land where we own mineral rights, meaning, Frank's smile was sharp as a blade, meaning he's trespassing on our property with armed men, which gives us legal justification for any action we take in defense of our holdings. Rebecca moved to a different cabinet and withdrew items. That made Caleb reassess everything. He thought he knew about the youngest Windcatcher daughter. Survey equipment, detailed maps, and what looked like mining charges. I've been mapping the underground geology for months, she said, spreading blueprints across the table. The diamond formations follow specific geological patterns, which means she traced lines on the maps that corresponded to natural features in the valley, which means we know exactly where the ground is stable and where it isn't, Sarah finished, her expression becoming predatory. Roberto suddenly looked up from his telegraph key. I'm getting something. Not from Fort Benton, from Denver. He scribbled rapidly as the message came through, then handed it to Joseph. The chief's eyebrows rose as he read. Gentlemen, the situation just became even more interesting. Our attorney in Denver reports that McKinnon's financial backers have discovered his true situation. As of 1 hour ago, they've withdrawn all support and demanded immediate repayment of their loans. How much? William asked. $1.2 million, due within 24 hours. Marcus whistled low. He's completely ruined, which makes him infinitely more dangerous, Caleb pointed out. A man with nothing left to lose will take risks a rational person wouldn't consider. Joseph nodded gravely. Exactly. Which is why we're not going to give him the chance. He began moving pieces on the tactical model with decisive precision. Sarah, take 20 of our best riders and circle north. You'll hit McKinnon's flanking group from behind while they're moving through Devil's Canyon. The canyon with the unstable rock formations, Sarah said with grim satisfaction. Rebecca, you'll take our geological team and enough explosives to create landslides at 3 specific points. When McKinnon's main force tries to retreat, they'll find their escape routes blocked. Rebecca was already gathering her equipment. How long do you need? 2 hours minimum. Can you do it? Give me 90 minutes, she replied with the confidence of someone who'd obviously done similar work before. William gathered his legal documents. What about the federal marshals? When they arrive and find McKinnon's men dead or captured on our property, we need ironclad legal justification. Frank was already drafting documents. I'm preparing affidavits documenting McKinnon's threats, the attack yesterday, and his current armed trespass on our mineral holdings. Between that and the federal warrants already issued, we'll be completely protected. Danny Whitehorse had been listening intently. What about McKinnon himself? He's staying back with a small group, probably waiting to see how the initial attack goes. Joseph's smile was as cold as the winter wind. McKinnon is mine. Marcus, you'll take our remaining defenders and create enough noise here to convince him his attack is succeeding. Meanwhile, Caleb and I will pay Mr. McKinnon a personal visit, just the two of us. Caleb asked. Sometimes the most direct approach is the most effective. Roberto handed Joseph a leather pouch containing what looked like official documents. These came with a message from Denver. Federal seizure orders for all of McKinnon's assets, effective immediately. Perfect, Joseph said, tucking the documents inside his coat. Mr. McKinnon is about to discover that his problems extend far beyond this valley. As the family dispersed to prepare for their respective missions, Sarah approached Caleb. Despite everything happening around them, she moved with the same composed grace he'd noticed from the beginning. This isn't what you expected when you cut me down from that tree, is it? She asked. Not exactly. I thought I was saving someone who needed help. I didn't realize I was joining a war. You weren't joining a war, she corrected. You were ending one. McKinnon's been fighting this battle for months, but he never understood who his real opponents were. Rebecca appeared with a pack loaded with surveying equipment and what Caleb now recognized as carefully measured explosive charges. "Mr. Henderson, my father's plan will work, but only if every element succeeds perfectly. Are you prepared for what comes next?" Caleb looked around the room at these extraordinary people who had built an empire through intelligence, planning, and sheer determination. They'd transformed themselves from victims of circumstances into masters of their own destiny. "I'm ready," he said. William handed him a rifle that was clearly superior to anything he'd ever carried. "This is a modified Winchester, custom-built by our gunsmith. 44 caliber with improved accuracy and a larger magazine capacity. Marcus provided ammunition and a detailed map showing McKinnon's current position. He's holed up in the old Branson homestead, about 3 miles southeast. Good defensive position, but only one escape route, which we'll be blocking," Joseph added, checking his own weapons with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd clearly done this before. Danny Whitehorse mounted a fresh horse. "I'll ride ahead and keep watch on McKinnon's movements. If anything changes, I'll signal with mirror flashes from the ridge." As they prepared to leave, Caleb realized that everything had changed in the space of a few hours. What had begun as a simple rescue had evolved into something far more complex, a battle for the future of an entire region. Joseph swung into his saddle with the easy grace of a man born to riding. His horse was a magnificent animal, clearly bred for both speed and endurance. Even his tack spoke of wealth and quality, though Caleb noticed it was also practical and battle-ready. "Mr. Henderson," Joseph said as they rode out of the valley, "there's something you should understand about what we're doing today. This isn't just about stopping McKinnon or protecting our business interests." They rode hard across terrain that Joseph navigated with intimate familiarity. Caleb found himself impressed by the chief's horsemanship and his obvious knowledge of every trail and landmark. "What is it about, then?" "It's about proving that there are different ways to fight for what you believe in. My grandfather fought with war parties and buffalo hunts. My father fought with treaties and negotiations. I fought with banks and lawyers. They crested a hill that gave them a view of the Branson homestead below. Smoke rose from the chimney, and Caleb could see armed men positioned around the buildings. But sometimes," Joseph continued, checking his rifle, "the old ways and the new ways have to come together." McKinnon's position was exactly as Danny had described, defensible, but with limited escape options. The homestead sat in a natural bowl surrounded by low hills, with a single road leading out to the main trail. "How do you want to approach this?" Caleb asked. Joseph studied the position through his spyglass. "Directly. McKinnon spent months trying to intimidate and threaten us through intermediaries. It's time he faced the consequences of his actions personally." They dismounted and approached on foot, using the natural cover of rocks and scrub brush. As they got closer, Caleb could hear voices from the homestead, men arguing about timing and tactics. "The attack should have started by now," one voice complained. "Maybe they ran into more resistance than expected," another replied, a third voice. Obviously, McKinnon's was harsh with frustration. "I don't care what kind of resistance they found. Those Indians have been making fools of us for months, and it ends today." Joseph and Caleb exchanged glances. They were close enough now to see McKinnon himself, a big man with graying hair and the kind of face that suggested he was accustomed to getting his way through force. "Mr. McKinnon," Joseph called out, stepping into the open with his hands visible but ready. "I believe you and I need to have a conversation." The effect was electric. Men scrambled for weapons, horses shied nervously, and McKinnon himself froze, like a man who'd seen a ghost. "Joseph Windcatcher," McKinnon snarled. "Come to surrender?" "Actually," Joseph replied calmly, "I've come to accept yours." McKinnon's laughter was ugly and bitter. "Surrender? You're surrounded, Windcatcher. My men are probably burning your precious village to the ground right now." Joseph reached into his coat and withdrew the leather pouch Roberto had given him. Actually, Mr. McKinnon, your men are currently trapped in 3 separate locations, facing overwhelming odds and federal charges. But we can discuss that later. First, I have some documents you might find interesting. He tossed the pouch to the ground between them. Federal seizure orders for all your assets, effective immediately. Signed this morning by Judge Morrison in Denver. McKinnon's face went white as he read the papers. This is impossible. You can't just— I can and I have, Joseph interrupted. Did you really think you could operate in this territory without someone keeping track of your activities? Your cattle theft, your intimidation tactics, your illegal use of government contracts? We've been documenting everything for months. One of McKinnon's men, a lean gunfighter with nervous eyes, shifted uncomfortably. Boss, maybe we should— Shut up, McKinnon snarled. This Indian's bluffing. Caleb stepped forward, his rifle ready but not aimed. He's not bluffing. I've seen the evidence. You're finished, McKinnon? Henderson? McKinnon's eyes narrowed with recognition. You're supposed to be dead. My men said they killed the witness. Your men aren't very reliable, Caleb replied. They also told you that attacking the Windcatcher family would be easy. As if summoned by his words, the distant sound of explosions echoed across the valley. McKinnon spun toward the noise, his face draining of color. What was that? Joseph checked his pocket watch with theatrical precision. That would be my daughter Rebecca, closing off your men's escape routes. She's quite talented with explosives, studied engineering at the Colorado School of Mines. More explosions followed, and McKinnon's remaining men began looking around nervously. These weren't the sounds of battle they'd expected to hear. You're lying, McKinnon said, but his voice lacked conviction. Joseph withdrew a small mirror from his pocket and angled it to catch the sunlight. 3 quick flashes, pause, 3 more flashes. Within moments, an answering signal came from the ridge above them. That was Danny Whitehorse, confirming that your northern flank has been eliminated. 23 men captured, 0 casualties on our side. One of McKinnon's gunfighters stepped back. Boss, I didn't sign up for this. If they've got federal backing— McKinnon drew his pistol and pointed it at the retreating man. You'll stay and fight or I'll shoot you myself. Interesting management style, Joseph observed. Is that how you've been maintaining loyalty? Through threats and intimidation. The standoff stretched taut as a violin string. McKinnon's remaining men, Caleb counted, 8, were clearly wavering between fear of their boss and growing realization that they'd walked into a trap. Then the sound of approaching hoofbeats filled the air. A large group of riders was coming fast, dust clouds marking their progress across the prairie. My reinforcements, McKinnon said with desperate confidence. You're about to be outnumbered 10-1. Joseph smiled and signaled again with his mirror. The answering flash pattern was different this time, longer, more complex. Actually, he said calmly, those are my people, along with federal marshals, cavalry from Fort Benton, and approximately 40 very angry ranchers who just discovered how you've been manipulating their property values. The riders crested the hill and spread out in a wide circle around the homestead. Caleb could see the blue uniforms of cavalry troopers mixed with the civilian clothes of ranchers and the distinctive badges of federal law enforcement. At the head of the group rode Sarah, her impressive height making her unmistakable even at a distance. As they drew closer, Caleb could see she was grinning with fierce satisfaction. "Good morning, Father," she called out as the riders surrounded the homestead. "I thought you might like to know that McKinnon's remaining forces have decided to surrender rather than face federal charges." A man in a marshal's uniform dismounted and approached the group. "Sean McKinnon, you're under arrest for armed assault on federal territory, cattle theft, conspiracy to defraud, and murder." "This is ridiculous," McKinnon protested. "These Indians attacked first. I was defending my property." Marshal Davidson, Caleb could see the name on his badge, held up a thick folder. "We have signed statements from 47 witnesses documenting your illegal activities over the past 18 months. We also have testimony from 3 of your own men who decided cooperation was preferable to hanging." One of McKinnon's gunfighters dropped his weapon. "I'm done. This ain't worth dying for." The others quickly followed suit, their weapons hitting the ground like falling dominoes. Only McKinnon himself remained defiant, his pistol still drawn, but shaking in his grip. "You can't destroy me," he said desperately. "I have friends, connections, people who won't stand for this." Joseph stepped closer, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "Your friends abandoned you when they discovered your financial situation. Your connections cut their losses when the federal warrants were issued. You're alone, Mr. McKinnon." Marshal Davidson moved to place McKinnon in restraints. "You have the right to legal representation, though I should mention that your assets have been frozen pending the outcome of the federal investigation." As McKinnon was led away, still protesting his innocence, Sarah approached her father. "The Diamond survey teams have completed their preliminary assessment of the captured territories, and Rebecca appeared as if from nowhere, her clothes dusty from her demolition work, but her expression triumphant. "The geological formations are even richer than we projected. Conservative estimates suggest we're looking at a diamond field worth at least $50 million. Caleb felt his knees go weak. "$50 million? William rode up with a saddlebag full of documents. "The legal paperwork is already in motion. As of today, the Windcatcher Mining Consortium owns mineral rights to over 200,000 acres of diamond-bearing territory." Marshal Davidson finished securing McKinnon and turned to Joseph. "Chief Windcatcher, I need to ask about the explosions we heard. Were there casualties in your defensive actions?" "None," Joseph replied. "My daughter Rebecca is an expert at using geological instability to create barriers rather than weapons. The explosions sealed off escape routes but didn't harm anyone. And the men who surrendered?" Sarah consulted a list she'd been carrying. 43 prisoners total, all being held under federal authority. "We've provided detailed evidence of their crimes, and they'll receive fair trials." One of the ranchers who'd ridden with the federal force dismounted and approached Joseph. Caleb recognized him as Theodore Blackwood from the Bartee Ranch. "Chief Windcatcher," Theodore said, extending his hand. "I owe you an apology. When you approached me about mineral rights, I thought you were taking advantage of my financial troubles. I had no idea you were protecting me from something like this." Joseph shook the offered hand. "No apology necessary, Mr. Blackwood. You made a business decision that benefited both of us." "About that," Theodore continued, "now that I understand what's really happening here, I'd like to discuss expanding our partnership. My ranch can provide cattle and agricultural support for your mining operations." Other ranchers began gathering around, and Caleb realized he was witnessing the birth of something unprecedented, a genuine cooperation between Native American and white business interests based on mutual respect and shared profit. Frank Morrison appeared, with his ever-present ledgers. "The financial restructuring is proceeding smoothly. McKinnon's seized assets will more than cover the damages to affected parties, and the Territorial Bank is stable despite his attempts at manipulation." Roberto emerged from the homestead, carrying McKinnon's personal papers. "His correspondence confirms everything we suspected. He's been planning this campaign for over a year, funded by Eastern investors who expected massive returns from territorial expansion. Those investors are about to be very disappointed." William noted with satisfaction. Marshal Davidson finished his preliminary investigation and returned to the group. "Chief Windcatcher, I have to say, this is the most professionally handled citizens' action I've ever witnessed. Your documentation, your restraint in using force, your cooperation with federal authorities, it's exemplary. We've learned that working within the system is more effective than fighting against it." Joseph replied. A cavalry captain rode up and saluted. "Sir, my orders are to ensure the safety of this operation and to escort prisoners to federal holding. Is there anything else you need?" Joseph considered the question. "Actually, Captain, there is one thing. I'd like you to witness something that I think will be historically significant." He walked to the center of the gathered crowd, federal marshals, cavalry troopers, ranchers, and his own family members. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly across the group. "For too long, this territory has been divided by suspicion, greed, and violence. Men like McKinnon thrived by setting neighbor against neighbor, white against native, settler against rancher. He paused, looking around at the faces surrounding him. Today, we've demonstrated that there's a better way. When people work together based on law, respect, and mutual benefit, they can accomplish things that seemed impossible. Theodore Blackwood stepped forward. Chief Windcatcher is right. I've been ranching in this territory for 15 years, and I've never seen cooperation like this. Other ranchers murmured agreement, and even the federal officials seemed impressed by what they'd witnessed. Sarah moved to stand beside her father. This is just the beginning. The Windcatcher Mining Consortium will provide jobs, education, and economic opportunity for anyone willing to work honestly and treat others with respect. Rebecca opened her surveying case and pulled out detailed maps. We're planning to establish 3 new towns to support the mining operations. Each one will have schools, hospitals, and modern conveniences, built by local contractors, William added, employing local workers and serving the entire community regardless of background. Caleb found himself thinking about his conversation with Sarah the previous evening, when she'd asked what he wanted as payment for his help. He'd asked for a job, but what he was seeing went far beyond simple employment. "Mr. Henderson," Joseph said, as if reading his thoughts, "you mentioned wanting a real job working for people who understand loyalty. I'd like to make you an offer." The gathered crowd quieted, sensing that something important was about to happen. "I'm offering you a position as liaison between our operations and the territorial ranching community. Your job would be to help us build the kind of cooperation we've seen today." "What would that involve?" Sarah smiled. "Travel throughout the territory, meet with ranchers and business owners, help them understand the opportunities that partnership with us could provide. Plus," Rebecca added, "coordinate security for our operations and serve as our representative to territorial and federal authorities." William pulled out a contract from his ever-present document case. "The salary would be $200 per month, plus housing, transportation, and a percentage of profits from any new partnerships you help establish." Caleb stared at the figure. $200 per month was more than most successful ranchers made. "There's one more thing," Joseph said quietly. "This position would make you the first white man to hold executive authority in a Native American business consortium. You'd be helping to write history." The weight of the moment settled on Caleb's shoulders. A day ago, he'd been a simple ranch hand following strayed cattle. Now he was being offered a chance to be part of something that could change the entire territory. He looked around at the faces surrounding him. Sarah's confident smile, Rebecca's enthusiastic encouragement, William's professional respect, Joseph's steady confidence. These people had trusted him with their secrets, included him in their plans, and offered him a future he'd never imagined possible. "I accept," he said simply. 3 months later, Caleb Henderson stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed Windsor Mining Company headquarters, watching the bustling activity in the valley below. What had once been a quiet Native American settlement had transformed into the most prosperous mining operation in the entire Montana territory. The building beneath his feet was itself a marvel. 4 stories of native stone and imported steel, housing offices, laboratories, and living quarters for the consortium's growing staff. But it was the view that never failed to amaze him. Where once there had been empty prairie, 3 thriving communities now stretched across the landscape, connected by new roads and the gleaming rails of the Windcatcher Northern Railroad. "Impressive, isn't it?" Sarah's voice came from behind him. Even after months of working together, her quiet approach still caught him off guard occasionally. "It's incredible," Caleb replied. "Sometimes I have to remind myself that all this started because I found you tied to a tree." Sarah joined him at the railing, her presence as commanding as always. The months had been kind to her. The haunted look from that terrible day had been replaced by the confident bearing of someone who'd found her true. "Calling in, building something unprecedented. Father says you've received responses from all 15 ranches in the northern "Undistrict," she said. Caleb nodded, pulling a folder from his jacket. 14 want to join the consortium. The 15th is Benjamin Crawford, and he's complicated. Complicated how? He's interested in the profits, but he's having trouble accepting a Native American business as an equal partner. Old attitudes die hard. Sarah's expression grew thoughtful. What did you tell him? That prejudice is expensive. The Hendricks Ranch joined us 2 months ago and has already seen a 40% increase in profits. Crawford's neighbors are prospering while he's struggling to maintain his current operation. They walked inside to Joseph's executive office, where the daily coordination meeting was already underway. The room buzzed with controlled activity, William reviewing legal documents, Rebecca consulting geological surveys, Frank analyzing financial reports, and Roberto coordinating communications with their expanding network of business partners. "See, Caleb," Joseph said, looking up from a telegraph message. "Perfect timing. We've received an interesting proposition from the territorial governor." He handed over the telegram, and Caleb read it with growing amazement. Governor Mitchell was requesting a meeting to discuss the Windcatcher Consortium's potential involvement in developing territorial infrastructure. Roads, bridges, schools, and government buildings. They want us to essentially rebuild the territorial capital, William explained. The current facilities are inadequate for the population growth we're experiencing. Rebecca spread architectural plans across the conference table. "I've been working with engineers from Chicago on preliminary designs. We could create a model city that incorporates the best of both Native American and modern American urban planning." Frank opened his ledger to a page dense with figures. "The financial projections are staggering. If we take on this project, we'd need to expand our workforce by over 2,000 people within the next year." "Which brings us to an interesting challenge," Sarah said. "We need someone to coordinate between our operations and the territorial government. Someone who understands both worlds and has the respect of officials in Denver and Washington." Joseph leaned back in his chair, studying Caleb with the same intensity he'd shown that first night in Windcatcher Valley. "We've been discussing this as a family, and we're unanimous in our recommendation." "For what?" William pulled out an official-looking document. "We want you to become our territorial representative. It would involve relocating to the new capital, establishing formal relationships with government officials, and essentially serving as our ambassador to the white political establishment." Caleb felt his pulse quicken. "That's a massive responsibility." "With massive rewards," Frank added. "The salary would be $500 per month, plus expenses, plus equity participation in all territorial development projects." Rebecca leaned forward excitedly. "You'd be helping to design the future of this entire region. Cities, transportation networks, educational systems, everything that will shape how people live here for generations." Joseph stood and walked to a large map showing their current holdings and planned expansion. "Caleb, when you saved my daughter's life, you set in motion changes that none of us could have predicted. The question now is whether you're ready to help us finish what we started." Before Caleb could respond, Roberto looked up from his telegraph key. "Sir, we're receiving an urgent message from Denver." The clicking of the telegraph filled the room as Roberto transcribed the incoming message. When it stopped, his face showed excitement mixed with disbelief. "What is it?" Sarah asked. Roberto read from his notes. "The federal government is formally recognizing the Windcatcher Consortium as a sovereign business entity with the same rights and protections as any state-chartered corporation." William grabbed the message and read it himself. "This is unprecedented. They're essentially saying that our business operations have the same legal standing as Standard Oil or Carnegie Steel." Joseph smiled with quiet satisfaction. "Which means we can negotiate directly with federal agencies, bid on government contracts, and establish operations anywhere in the United States." Frank was already calculating possibilities. "The implications for expansion are enormous. We could establish mining operations in Colorado, timber operations in Oregon, cattle ranches in Texas, or, Rebecca added with growing excitement, we could help other Native American communities establish similar operations. Share what we've learned, provide startup capital, create a network of indigenous business enterprises. The scope of what they were discussing took Caleb's breath away. You're talking about changing the entire relationship between Native Americans and the federal government. Exactly, Joseph confirmed. For too long, that relationship has been based on dependency and conflict. We're proving there's another way, partnership based on mutual respect and shared prosperity. Sarah moved to the window, overlooking their thriving communities. But it only works if we have people who can bridge both worlds. People who understand that prosperity doesn't have to come at someone else's expense. Another telegraph message began coming through, and Roberto quickly transcribed it. This one was from an unexpected source, the Denver Post newspaper. They want to do a feature story on our operation, Roberto announced. They're calling it The Miracle of Windcatcher Valley and want to send a reporter to document what we've built here. William immediately looked concerned. That kind of publicity could bring unwanted attention. Or, Joseph countered, it could inspire other communities to try similar approaches. Imagine if what we've accomplished here became a model for economic development throughout the West. Rebecca pulled out population and economic statistics she'd been compiling. The 3 towns we've established are already home to over 4,000 people. Our educational programs are attracting families from as far away as California. Our hospital serves the medical needs of the entire Northern Territory. Frank added his own figures. More importantly, our success has created opportunities for everyone in the region. Property values have increased, new businesses are opening, and unemployment is virtually non-existent. Caleb studied the faces around him, people who had transformed themselves from targets of discrimination into leaders of unprecedented change. What happens if I accept this position? Where do we go from here? Joseph returned to his chair and pulled out a leather portfolio that Caleb had never seen before. When he opened it, the contents made everyone in the room lean forward with interest. These are preliminary discussions we've been having with business leaders in 12 different states, Joseph explained. Each one represents an opportunity to establish Windcatcher Consortium operations in new territories. The documents outlined possibilities that seemed almost fantastical. Silver mines in Nevada, shipping operations on the Great Lakes, manufacturing facilities in industrial cities, even international trade agreements with companies in Europe and Asia. The federal recognition gives us the legal foundation to pursue any of these opportunities, William explained. But we need someone with your diplomatic skills to make them reality. Sarah pulled out a final document, a contract unlike anything Caleb had ever seen. This isn't just a job offer, Caleb. We're offering you a full partnership in everything we build going forward. The terms were staggering. Equal voting rights in business decisions, equal share of profits, equal authority in representing the consortium's interests. It was an offer that would make him one of the wealthiest and most influential men in the American West. There's one condition, Joseph said quietly. This partnership requires absolute commitment to our principles. Fair treatment for all people regardless of background, honest dealing in all business affairs, and using our success to create opportunities for others. Caleb looked around the room at these remarkable people who had welcomed him into their vision of a better future. Through the windows, he could see the schools where native and white children learned together, the businesses where people of all backgrounds worked as equals, the communities where prosperity was shared rather than hoarded. I have a question, he said finally. What happened to McKinnon? Roberto consulted his files. He's serving 15 years in federal prison. His former associates have either joined legitimate businesses or left the territory entirely, and his property, Frank smiled, purchased by the consortium at a federal auction. We've turned his former ranch into a school for agricultural innovation. Seems appropriate, Sarah laughed. The man who tried to destroy us through violence ended up providing the land for one of our most successful educational programs. Joseph stood and extended his hand. "So, Mr. Henderson, are you ready to help us build the future?" Caleb thought about his life before that fateful day when he'd seen dust clouds on the horizon. 8 years of drifting from job to job, no real purpose, no lasting connections, no vision beyond simple survival. Now he was being offered a chance to be part of something that could reshape an entire continent. The opportunity to prove that cooperation was more powerful than conflict, that prosperity could be shared rather than fought over, that people from different backgrounds could build something better together than any of them could achieve alone. He shook Joseph's hand firmly. "Let's build the future." As the sun set over Windcatcher Valley, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and crimson, Caleb stood once again on the observation deck. But this time he wasn't alone. Sarah, Rebecca, William and Joseph joined him, along with dozens of other consortium members. Native Americans, white settlers, immigrants from Europe and Asia, former soldiers and cowboys and teachers and engineers. Below them, the lights of 3 thriving communities twinkled like stars against the darkening prairie. Children played in safe streets while their parents returned from well-paying jobs. Schools and libraries buzzed with activity. Workshops and laboratories pushed the boundaries of innovation and progress. "You know," Caleb said to Sarah, "sometimes I think about what would have happened if I'd ridden past that tree without stopping." Sarah smiled, her eyes reflecting the last rays of sunlight. "Then someone else would have found me eventually. The important thing isn't who rescued whom, it's what we chose to build afterward. And this is just the beginning," Joseph added, his voice carrying the quiet confidence that had become his trademark. 20 years from now, when historians write about the transformation of the American West, they'll mark this valley as the place where everything changed." Rebecca pulled out her latest architectural plans. "The Territorial Capital Project alone will employ 10,000 people. And that's just one of our current initiatives." William consulted his legal documents. "We have formal inquiries from business leaders in 17 states who want to establish similar operations in their regions." Frank closed his ledger with satisfaction. By this time next year, the Windcatcher Consortium will be one of the largest business enterprises in North America. As the stars emerged in the clear Montana sky, Caleb reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. A simple act of human decency, cutting down a woman who'd been left to die, had led to discoveries and opportunities beyond his wildest imagination. But more than that, it had shown him that the most valuable things in life couldn't be measured in dollars or acres or even diamonds. They were measured in relationships built on respect, communities founded on cooperation, and futures created through shared vision and mutual trust. The reward Joseph Windcatcher had given him wasn't gold or silver or precious stones. It was something far more valuable, the chance to be part of building a world where such rewards were possible for everyone willing to work for them. And as he looked out over the valley that had become his home, Caleb Henderson knew that the best was yet to come. The following morning brought news that would test everything they had built. Roberto's telegraph began chattering before dawn, bringing word from their operations throughout the territory. A coordinated series of incidents had occurred overnight. Suspicious fires at 2 mining sites, attempts to sabotage railroad equipment, and threatening messages left at partner ranches. "Someone's trying to intimidate our allies," Marcus reported during the emergency meeting. He spread incident reports across the conference table, his expression grim. These weren't random acts of vandalism. Too coordinated, too specific. Sarah studied the pattern of attacks. It's not McKinnon's old crew. They're either in prison or fled the territory. This is someone new. Joseph examined photographs of the damage. Or someone old with new resources. "Roberto, send word to our intelligence network. I want to know who's behind this within 24 hours. William pulled out files he'd been reviewing since before sunrise. "There's something else. 3 of our banking partners have received anonymous letters claiming our federal recognition was obtained fraudulently. Any substance to the claims?" Caleb asked. None whatsoever. Our documentation is ironclad, but the accusations are detailed enough to suggest inside knowledge of our operations. Rebecca burst into the room, carrying geological samples and mining reports. Father, we have a problem at the Silver Point operation. Someone's been conducting unauthorized surveys on adjacent properties. Frank looked up from his financial records. Adjacent properties owned by whom? That's just it. The ownership records are obscured through multiple shell companies, but the survey work is professional-grade expensive. Whoever's doing this has significant resources. Joseph walked to the window, overlooking their thriving valley. Gentlemen, ladies, we've reached a crossroads. Success always breeds new challenges, and our prosperity has apparently attracted attention from competitors who prefer less honorable methods. A knock at the door interrupted their discussion. Marcus admitted a visitor that none of them had expected, former Territorial Governor Benjamin Harrison, now serving as a federal mediator for Western business disputes. Chief Windcatcher, Harrison said, removing his hat respectfully. I apologize for the early hour, but I'm afraid we have urgent matters to discuss. Joseph gestured to a chair. Governor Harrison, you're always welcome here. What brings you to our valley? Harrison accepted the offer of coffee before beginning. Yesterday, I received formal complaints about your consortium from a group calling itself the Western Development Alliance. They're claiming that your rapid expansion constitutes unfair competition and demanding federal intervention. On what grounds? William asked, his legal training immediately engaged. They allege that your federal recognition gives you advantages that other businesses don't enjoy. Tax benefits, exclusive government contracts, preferential treatment from territorial officials. Sarah's eyes flashed with anger. All completely false. We compete on equal terms with every other business in the territory. I know that, Harrison replied calmly. Which is why I'm here unofficially to warn you. This Western Development Alliance has hired some very expensive lawyers from New York, and they're preparing to file federal lawsuits challenging your corporate status. Frank closed his ledgers with more force than necessary. Let me guess, they're also behind last night's sabotage attempts. I can't prove that, but the timing is suspicious, Harrison admitted. What I can tell you is that they've been meeting with certain members of Congress who have reservations about Native American business success. Joseph's expression grew thoughtful. Do we know who's funding this alliance? Harrison pulled out a telegram from his coat. That's where things become interesting. My sources in Washington indicate significant financial backing from Eastern industrial interests. Companies that view your Western expansion plans as threats to their market dominance. Caleb felt pieces clicking together. They're afraid we'll compete with them in national markets. Exactly. Your consortium isn't just successful locally, you're developing the resources and infrastructure to challenge established monopolies. That makes you dangerous to some very powerful people. Rebecca spread her geological surveys across the table. Our mineral deposits are richer than we initially estimated. Latest assessments suggest we could become one of the largest precious metal producers in the world, which explains the unauthorized surveys, William noted. They're trying to determine the full extent of our resources. Roberto looked up from his telegraph key. I'm receiving reports from our partners throughout the territory. Similar pressure is being applied to everyone associated with us. Threats, intimidation, offers to buy out their consortium partnerships. Joseph turned to Harrison. Governor, what's your assessment of our legal position? Legally, you're bulletproof. Your federal recognition was properly obtained. Your business practices are exemplary, and your documentation is flawless. But legal correctness doesn't always guarantee practical outcomes, especially when opposing interests have political influence. Sarah moved to the map, showing their expanding operations. Then we need to move faster than they can react. If they want a competition, let's give them one they'll never forget. What do you have in mind? Caleb asked. Joseph smiled with the expression Caleb had learned to associate with particularly brilliant strategies. We accelerate our expansion timeline. Instead of gradual growth over 5 years, we establish operations in key markets within 6 months. Frank opened a new ledger filled with financial projections. It's risky. We'd be committing massive resources simultaneously across multiple territories. But if we succeed, William added, we'd be too established to dislodge through legal challenges or economic pressure. Rebecca pulled out architectural plans for projects they'd discussed, but not yet implemented. The infrastructure requirements alone would be staggering. We'd need to hire and train thousands of workers, establish supply chains across half the continent, and coordinate with dozens of local governments. Harrison leaned forward with interest. You're talking about the largest business expansion in American history. Precisely, Joseph confirmed. And we're going to do it while maintaining our principles of fair employment, honest dealing, and shared prosperity. Caleb studied the scope of what they were proposing. We'd be betting everything on this move. If it fails, we lose everything we've built, Sarah acknowledged. But if it succeeds, we will establish a new model for American business that no one can challenge or destroy. Roberto's telegraph began chattering again, and he quickly transcribed the incoming message. This is from our attorney in Washington. The Western Development Alliance has filed preliminary injunctions attempting to freeze our assets pending investigation. How long do we have? William asked. The injunctions won't be heard for at least a week, possibly 2, but they're trying to prevent us from making any major financial commitments during that time. Joseph walked to his safe and withdrew documents Caleb had never seen before. Fortunately, we anticipated this possibility. These are irrevocable trust arrangements, established months ago, that protect our core assets from any legal challenges. Frank examined the trust documents with growing amazement. This is brilliant. Even if they somehow succeeded with their lawsuits, they couldn't touch the resources we need for expansion. Moreover, William added, studying the legal language, these trusts are structured to benefit not just our consortium, but every community where we establish operations. It would be impossible to characterize our expansion as purely profit-driven. Harrison stood to leave. Chief Windcatcher, I came here to warn you about the challenges you're facing. I'm leaving, convinced that your opponents have seriously underestimated what they're up against. After Harrison departed, the room fell silent as everyone contemplated the magnitude of what lay ahead. They were about to embark on an expansion that would either establish them as one of America's premier business enterprises, or destroy everything they'd worked to. Bill, there's something else we need to consider, Caleb said finally. If we're successful with this expansion, we'll be responsible for the livelihoods of tens of thousands of people. That's a responsibility unlike anything we've faced before. Sarah nodded gravely, which is why we need to be absolutely certain that our principles remain intact as we grow. Success without integrity is just another form of failure. Joseph returned to the window, gazing out at the communities that had grown from his vision of what was possible. My grandfather once told me that the greatest battles aren't fought for territory or resources, but for the right to determine what kind of world our children will inherit. Rebecca gathered her geological reports and architectural plans. Then let's make sure we're building the right kind of world. Frank reopened his ledgers with renewed determination. I'll need complete financial projections for all proposed operations within 48 hours. William began organizing legal documents, and I'll coordinate with our attorneys in every state where we plan to establish operations. Roberto returned to his telegraph key. I'll notify all our partners about the acceleration of our timeline. Marcus examined his security assessments, and I'll make sure we're prepared for whatever our opponents try next. As the meeting dispersed and everyone hurried to their respective tasks, Caleb found himself alone with Sarah on the observation deck. The morning sun was climbing higher, casting long shadows across the valley where their remarkable journey had begun. Are you ready for what comes next? Sarah asked. Caleb considered the question seriously. 3 months ago, I was a ranch hand, with no prospects and no purpose. Now I'm about to help coordinate the largest business expansion in American history. I'm not sure anyone could be ready for that, but you're willing to try. I'm willing to try. More than that, I believe in what we're building. Not just the business success, but the idea that people from different backgrounds can work together to create something better than what existed before. Sarah smiled, her expression mixing determination with hope. Then let's get to work. We have a new world to build. As they watched the bustling activity in the valley below, workers heading to the mines, children walking to school, families beginning their daily routines in communities built on cooperation and mutual respect, Caleb reflected on how dramatically his life had changed since that moment when he'd chosen to investigate a dust cloud on the horizon. The reward, Joseph Windcatcher, had promised had indeed been beyond his wildest dreams. But it wasn't the wealth or the prestige or even the adventure that made it valuable. It was the opportunity to be part of proving that a different kind of future was possible, one where success was measured not just by what you accumulated, but by what you enabled others to achieve. And as Sarah had said, this was just the beginning. 1 year after their accelerated expansion began, Caleb Henderson stood in the marble-floored lobby of the Windcatcher Consortium's new headquarters in Denver, watching a steady stream of visitors from across the nation. Senators, business leaders, foreign investors, and journalists all came seeking audiences with the organization that had transformed the economic landscape of the American West. The building itself was a testament to their success. 12 stories of Colorado granite and imported steel, housing not just offices, but also a technical college, a cultural center, and the headquarters of the Windcatcher Foundation for Indigenous Education. From his office on the top floor, Caleb could see the smokestacks of their manufacturing facilities, the rail yards of their transportation network, and the construction sites of 3 new communities being built according to their innovative urban planning principles. Sarah entered carrying newspapers from New York, Chicago, and San Francisco. The press coverage from yesterday's congressional hearing is remarkable, she said, spreading the papers across his desk. Listen to this from the New York Herald. The Windcatcher Consortium has achieved what many thought impossible, proving that American business can expand rapidly while maintaining ethical standards and creating shared prosperity. Caleb read over the headlines with amazement. Congressional hearing validates Native American business empire. Windcatcher model, proposed for national adoption. Eastern industrial leaders admit defeat in anti-consortium campaign. The Chicago Tribune goes even further, Sarah continued. They're calling our expansion the most significant economic development since the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad. A knock at the door interrupted their review. William entered with a telegram that bore the seal of the President of the United States. This arrived an hour ago, William said, his expression mixing excitement with disbelief. President Cleveland wants to meet with Father personally to discuss the Windcatcher model as a framework for national economic policy. Caleb stared at the presidential seal. National economic policy. Sarah pulled out detailed reports from their operations across 12 states. Our employment practices, our profit-sharing arrangements, our community development programs. They've become case studies at universities throughout the country. William opened a folder containing correspondence from government officials. 3 state governors have formally requested our assistance in establishing similar operations in their territories. The Department of the Interior wants us to consult on Native American policy reform. And international interest is growing, Sarah added, showing him letters written in multiple languages. Business delegations from England, Germany, and Japan have all inquired about licensing our operational methods. Roberto appeared in the doorway with another urgent message. The final vote count from the Western Development Alliance shareholders meeting just came through. They've formally dissolved the organization and issued a public apology for their misguided campaign against legitimate business competition. The news marked the end of a year-long battle that had tested every aspect of their expansion strategy. The Western Development Alliance's legal challenges had all failed spectacularly. Their sabotage attempts had been thwarted by superior security planning, and their attempts to undermine consortium partnerships had only strengthened the bonds between allied businesses. What about the Eastern industrial interests that funded them? Caleb asked. William smiled with satisfaction. 3 of them have approached us about forming joint ventures. Apparently, they've decided that partnering with us is more profitable than fighting us. Rebecca entered, carrying architectural plans and engineering reports. The completion statistics for our expansion are final. In 12 months, we've established operations in 47 locations across 13 states. We're directly employing over 30,000 people and indirectly supporting another 100,000 jobs. More importantly, Sarah added, every community where we've established operations has seen improvements in education, healthcare, and economic opportunity for all residents, regardless of background. Joseph Windcatcher appeared in the doorway, his presence still commanding attention, even in their palatial corporate headquarters. At 67, he moved with the same confident stride that had impressed Caleb that first night in the valley. But now he carried himself with the additional authority of someone whose vision had reshaped an entire nation's understanding of what was possible. Family meeting, he announced. We have decisions to make that will affect the next generation of our operations. They gathered in the executive conference room, a space that had hosted meetings with some of the most powerful people in America. The walls were lined with photographs documenting their expansion, ribbon cuttings, groundbreaking ceremonies, graduations from their technical colleges, and celebrations in communities where their investments had transformed local economies. Joseph opened a leather portfolio containing documents that bore official seals from Washington, D.C. President Cleveland's meeting request is more significant than we initially realized. He's not just interested in our business methods, he's considering proposing federal legislation based on our operational principles. Frank looked up from financial reports that showed numbers Caleb still found difficult to comprehend. The Windcatcher Economic Development Act would provide federal support for any business operation that meets our standards for employee treatment, community investment, and ethical practices. The implications are staggering, William added. It would essentially make our approach to business the preferred model for federal contracting and investment. Rebecca spread maps showing proposed expansion sites, but accepting that role would require us to grow even larger. The federal government is talking about operations that would employ over 500,000 people within 5 years. Joseph studied the faces around the table. Which brings us to the fundamental question we must answer. Do we continue growing, or do we consolidate what we've built and focus on perfecting our existing operations? Marcus entered with security reports from all their facilities. From a practical standpoint, we've proven that our model works at scale. Security threats have decreased as our success has become undeniable. Even former opponents now recognize that cooperation is more profitable than conflict. Roberto consulted communications logs from their expanding network. Our partner businesses report that association with the consortium has become a valuable asset. The Windcatcher Certified designation now commands premium prices in markets across the country. Caleb found himself thinking about the enormous responsibility they were contemplating. If we accept this federal partnership, we'll essentially be responsible for demonstrating that ethical business practices can succeed at a national level. More than that, Sarah said. We'll be proving that the principles we've developed, fair treatment, shared prosperity, respect for all backgrounds, can become the foundation for America's economic future. Joseph walked to the window overlooking Denver's bustling downtown district. When I first began building our consortium, my goal was simply to protect my people and preserve our way of life. I never imagined we would reach a point where our success could influence national policy. Frank closed his ledgers with a decisive snap. The financial projections support expansion. We have the resources, the infrastructure, and the expertise to take on projects of any size. William organized his legal documents. And our federal recognition gives us the authority to operate anywhere in the United States or its territories. Rebecca pulled out her most ambitious architectural plans. I've been designing model cities that could house 1 million people while maintaining the community values we've established in smaller settlements. Roberto showed them communication networks that spanned the continent. Our information systems can coordinate operations on any scale necessary. Marcus reviewed security assessments with professional satisfaction. And we've proven that ethical operations are actually more secure than traditional business models. When you treat people fairly, they protect your interests rather than threatening them. Joseph returned to his seat at the head of the table. Then we're unanimous. We accept the federal partnership and commit to expansion on a national scale. One by one, each family member voiced their agreement. When Joseph turned to Caleb, the weight of the moment settled on his shoulders. Caleb, you've been with us from the beginning of this journey. Your voice carries equal weight in this decision. Caleb thought about his transformation from a drifting ranch hand to a leader in America's most successful business enterprise. He thought about the communities they'd built, the families they'd helped prosper, and the proof they'd provided that different approaches to business were not only possible, but profitable. I agree, he said simply. Let's show the country what we can build together. Joseph smiled and opened the final document in his portfolio, a contract with the United States government that would make the Windcatcher Consortium the primary partner in a national economic development program. Then let's make history. 6 months later, Caleb stood once again on an observation deck. But this time, it overlooked not just a valley in Montana, but the construction site of New Harmony, Colorado, the first city built entirely according to Windcatcher principles. 50,000 residents would eventually call it home, working in industries that ranged from advanced manufacturing to agricultural innovation, all organized around the consortium's commitment to shared prosperity and mutual respect. Sarah joined him, her presence now familiar and comforting after their years of partnership. The president's speech yesterday was remarkable, she said. Did you hear what he said about the Windcatcher model? Caleb nodded. That it represents the best of American innovation applied to the oldest of American values, that success should benefit everyone willing to work for it. The international delegations were even more impressed, Sarah continued. Representatives from 8 countries have requested detailed information about replicating our approach. In their own nations, they watched construction, crews working on buildings that incorporated the latest engineering innovations with architectural styles that honored both Native American and immigrant traditions. Streets were designed to encourage community interaction while accommodating modern transportation needs. Schools, libraries, hospitals, and recreational facilities were positioned to serve every neighborhood equally. Joseph appeared beside them, carrying newspapers from around the world. The London Times calls New Harmony a glimpse into the future of human civilization. The Berlin Herald describes our expansion as proof that capitalism and compassion are not contradictory forces. Rebecca approached with a telegram that bore unusual urgency. Father, we've received an invitation that's unprecedented. She handed him the message, and Joseph's eyebrows rose as he read. The Emperor of Japan is requesting a formal meeting to discuss establishing Windcatcher operations in Asia. William, who had been reviewing legal documents nearby, looked up with interest. Asia? That would require creating entirely new frameworks for international business cooperation. Frank joined them with financial projections that showed global possibilities. The economic opportunities are enormous, but the cultural complexities would be unlike anything we've faced before. Roberto appeared with communications equipment that reflected their expanding technological capabilities. I've been in contact with business leaders in Tokyo, Hong Kong, and Shanghai. Interest in our operational methods is extraordinarily high. Marcus consulted security assessments for international operations. The challenges would be significant, but our principles are adaptable to different cultural contexts. Joseph studied the invitation with the same thoughtful intensity Caleb remembered from their first meeting. 5 years ago, we were struggling to survive in a single valley in Montana. Now we're being invited to help reshape the global economy. Sarah laughed with wonder. It seems impossible when you say it like that. No more impossible than anything else we've accomplished, Rebecca pointed out. We've proven that the most ambitious goals are achievable when you have the right principles and the determination to apply them. Consistently, Caleb found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this moment. Do you ever think about what would have happened if I'd ridden past that tree without stopping? Joseph smiled. Someone else would have cut down my daughter eventually. But would they have understood the opportunity they were being offered? Would they have had the courage to see it through to the end? The important thing, Sarah added, isn't who rescued whom that day. The important thing is that we recognized what we could build together. William gathered his international legal documents. So we're considering Asian expansion. Joseph looked around at his family, biological and chosen, who had transformed an act of simple human decency into a force that was reshaping the modern world. We're considering everything, he said, because we've learned that when you commit to treating people fairly and sharing success broadly, there are no limits to what becomes possible. As the sun set over New Harmony, painting the sky in brilliant colors that reflected off the glass windows of buildings designed to house the future, Caleb thought about the reward Joseph Windcatcher had promised would be beyond his wildest dreams. The chief had been right, but not in the way Caleb had initially imagined. The reward wasn't wealth or power or even adventure, though he'd received all of those in abundance. The real reward was the knowledge that he'd been part of proving something important about human nature, that people from different backgrounds, working together with shared values and mutual respect, could accomplish things that seemed impossible when attempted alone. The dust cloud he'd seen on the horizon that day had indeed led to a discovery that changed everything. But it wasn't gold or silver or even diamonds that had transformed their world. It was the realization that the greatest treasures were the ones you could build together. And as he watched the lights come on in a city designed around principles of fairness and cooperation, Caleb Henderson knew that this was only the beginning. The future they were building would benefit not just their generation, but all the generations to come. The rescue had become a partnership. The partnership had become a revolution. And the revolution had become proof that the American dream was big enough to include everyone willing to work for it. Joseph Windcatcher had been right about one thing above all else. The reward had indeed been beyond his wildest dreams, because the best dreams weren't the ones you achieved for yourself. They were the ones you made possible for others. 10 years had passed since that fateful rescue, and Caleb now found himself preparing for what would be his final act as a leader of the Windcatcher Consortium. At 43, he had decided to step back from daily operations to focus on documenting their methods and training the next generation of leaders who would carry their vision forward. The occasion was the dedication of the Windcatcher Institute for Cooperative Economics, a university-level institution that would study and teach the principles they had developed through years of practical application. Students from around the world had already enrolled in programs that would prepare them to establish similar operations in their home countries. Rebecca, now 34 and serving as the consortium's chief innovation officer, had designed the Institute's campus as a living demonstration of their architectural and community planning principles. The buildings incorporated sustainable technologies that were decades ahead of their time, while the layout encouraged collaboration between students from diverse cultural and economic backgrounds. The first graduating class will include students from 14 different countries, Rebecca reported during their final planning meeting. We're literally training the people who will spread our methods across the globe, William. Now in his 40s and widely recognized as one of America's foremost experts in business law, had developed a legal curriculum that would teach future leaders how to structure organizations around principles of shared ownership and mutual benefit. The legal frameworks we've created are being studied by law schools in Europe and Asia, he noted with pride. What we developed out of necessity is becoming the foundation for a new understanding of corporate responsibility. Frank's financial innovations had proven equally influential. His profit-sharing models and community investment strategies were now standard practice for hundreds of businesses across the continent. The Windcatcher approach to capitalism, where success was measured not just by profits but by positive community impact, had fundamentally changed how Americans thought about business. The Department of Commerce estimates that businesses using our methods now employ over 2 million people nationwide, Frank reported, and every one of those jobs pays above-average wages while contributing to community development funds. Sarah, who had become the consortium's primary spokesperson and diplomat, traveled constantly to meet with government officials, business leaders, and community organizers who wanted to understand how they had achieved what many still considered impossible. Last month's tour of the southeastern states was remarkable, she told the group. Former Confederate areas that have struggled economically since the war are now implementing our cooperative models with extraordinary success. Communities that have been divided by racial tensions for generations are working together productively for the first time. Marcus had evolved from security chief to director of what they called protective partnerships, alliances with local law, enforcement and community leaders that ensured their operations remained safe while contributing to regional stability. Crime rates in areas where we operate are consistently lower than national averages, he reported. When people have good jobs and hope for the future, they invest in protecting their communities rather than undermining them. Roberto's communication networks had grown into a continent-spanning information system that allowed instant coordination between all consortium operations. More importantly, it had become a platform for sharing innovations and best practices between affiliated organizations. We're receiving reports of new cooperative ventures starting up at a rate of 3 per week, Roberto announced. Most are small operations, but they're all using our foundational principles and contributing to the overall movement. Joseph, now 77, but still mentally sharp and physically active, had spent the past year writing his memoirs, not as a personal narrative, but as a practical guide for future leaders who would face similar challenges. The publisher tells me that advance orders for the book have exceeded 50,000 copies, he said with quiet satisfaction. Universities, government agencies, and business schools throughout North America and Europe are planning to use it as a primary text. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of an unexpected visitor, former President Cleveland, who had traveled to New Harmony specifically to attend the Institute's dedication ceremony. Chief Windcatcher, Mr. Henderson, Cleveland said warmly, I wanted to personally thank you for what you've accomplished. The Windcatcher model has become one of the most successful federal initiatives in our nation's history. Caleb shook the former president's hand, still amazed at how far their influence had reached. We never expected our methods to become government policy, Mr. President. Sometimes the best policies emerge from practical experience rather than theoretical planning, Cleveland replied. Your consortium has proven that American business can be both profitable and socially responsible. That's a lesson our entire nation needed to learn. Sarah joined the conversation, her diplomatic skills now polished through years of high-level negotiations. Mr. President, we're honored that our work has influenced national policy, but we've always believed that the real test isn't government adoption. It's whether ordinary communities can use these methods to improve their own situations. Cleveland nodded approvingly. which is exactly why your institute is so important. You're not just training business leaders, you're training community organizers, social reformers, and economic innovators who will carry your vision to places government programs could never reach. As they toured the Institute's facilities, Caleb reflected on the profound changes that had occurred since his simple decision to investigate a dust cloud on the Montana prairie. The consortium now operated in 38 states and 4 foreign countries. Their methods had been adopted by over 1,000 independent organizations. Universities offered degrees in wind catcher, economics. Government agencies consulted their research when developing new policies. But the most meaningful changes were the personal ones, the individual lives, transformed by access to good jobs, quality education, and communities built on mutual respect rather than competition and conflict. During the dedication ceremony, speakers included a former coal miner whose cooperative mining venture in Pennsylvania now employed 300 people under safe working conditions with shared ownership. A former sharecropper from Georgia spoke about the agricultural cooperative that had allowed dozens of families to purchase their own farms and achieve economic independence. A Native American educator from Arizona described how consortium-funded schools were preserving indigenous languages and cultures while preparing students for success in the modern economy. As the sun set on the dedication day, Caleb found himself once again on an observation deck, this time overlooking not just a single successful community, but a network of affiliated organizations that stretched across the continent and beyond. Joseph joined him, moving more slowly than in earlier years, but with the same dignified presence that had commanded respect from the beginning. "Any regrets, my friend?" Joseph asked. Caleb considered the question seriously. "Only one. I wish Peter and Thomas could have lived to see what grew from their sacrifice." "They did see it," Joseph replied quietly. "Not the physical buildings or the financial success, but the spirit that made it all possible. When they chose to die rather than betray our family's trust, they were protecting something much larger than diamond deposits or business plans." What were they protecting? The idea that people can be better than their worst impulses. That cooperation is stronger than competition. That sharing prosperity creates more wealth than hoarding it. Joseph paused, gazing out at the lights of New Harmony. Every person who has benefited from our work carries forward a little of what Peter and Thomas died to preserve. As if summoned by their conversation, Zara, Rebecca, William, Frank, Marcus, and Roberto joined them on the deck. 3 generations of leaders who had built something unprecedented in American business history. The board of directors met this afternoon. William announced, "They've unanimously approved your transition plan. Caleb, the Institute will have full autonomy to develop and teach cooperative economic principles to students from around the world," Rebecca added. "And they've established an endowment fund that will ensure the Institute can operate independently for at least 50 years, regardless of changes in political or economic conditions." Frank smiled with satisfaction. "The endowment is funded entirely through profits from our operations. We've literally created a self-sustaining system for spreading our methods to future generations." Sarah pulled out letters from around the world. "Students have already been accepted from 23 countries. In 5 years, we'll have trained cooperative leaders for 6 continents." Roberto showed them communication logs documenting the global reach of their influence. Messages arrive daily from organizations trying to implement our methods in contexts we never imagined. Urban cooperatives in industrial cities, agricultural alliances in developing countries, even international trade associations based on mutual benefit rather than competitive advantage. Marcus reviewed security assessments that now covered operations on multiple continents. "The remarkable thing is that our security concerns have decreased as our influence has expanded. Cooperative organizations are inherently more stable than competitive ones. Joseph listened to the reports with evident pride, but his focus remained on larger implications. What we've built here will outlast all of us. But more importantly, we've proven that alternatives to destructive competition are not only possible, but profitable. As the evening deepened and the lights of New Harmony sparkled like stars across the valley, Caleb thought about the legacy they were leaving. Not just successful businesses or innovative policies, but proof that ordinary people could change the fundamental assumptions about how society organized itself. The rescue that had started everything had become a revolution that was still spreading. And the reward that Joseph had promised would be beyond his wildest dreams continued to grow with each new community that chose cooperation over conflict. Each new business that prioritized shared prosperity over individual accumulation. Each new generation that learned there were better ways to organize human effort than the methods they had inherited. Standing there with the people who had become his family, looking out over a world they had helped to reshape, Caleb Henderson knew that the best rewards weren't the ones you received. They were the ones you made possible for others to achieve. And those rewards would continue growing long after their names were forgotten, carried forward by principles that had proven stronger than any individual ambition. The dust cloud on the horizon had led to discoveries beyond anything they could have imagined, but the greatest discovery was that the future belonged to those who had the courage to build it together. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.